I didn't open Ethan's letter for 11 days. I kept moving it around the apartment like it was radioactive. Desk drawer, kitchen counter, closet shelf. Every time I saw my name written in his handwriting, my stomach twisted. Daniel noticed eventually. "You're still thinking about him," he said quietly one night. It wasn't even a question anymore. Therapy hadn't magically repaired us. If anything, it stripped away all the routines we used to hide behind. Suddenly we were talking honestly for the first time in years, and honesty is ugly when two people have spent too long pretending. Some days we almost felt close again. Other days we looked like strangers sharing a lease. And then my period was late. At first I blamed stress. God knows there had been enough of that lately. But after 6 more days, I bought a test on my way home from work. I remember standing in the pharmacy staring at the box while my heart pounded so hard I thought I might actually faint in aisle 7. The cashier smiled at me politely like my entire world wasn't about to collapse. I took the test alone in the apartment bathroom while Daniel was at work. 2 pink lines appeared almost immediately. I just stared at them. Pregnant. My first emotion wasn't happiness. It was terror. Because the timeline hit me instantly. Daniel and I had been trying to reconnect physically during those weeks after Ethan moved out, desperately trying to save what was left of our marriage. But there was also one night. One horrible, confusing night I never told anyone about. 3 days after Ethan moved out, Daniel had gone out drinking with coworkers after a therapy session that left both of us emotionally wrecked. I couldn't sleep, so I drove around for almost an hour just trying to clear my head. And somehow I ended up outside Ethan's apartment. I told myself I only wanted closure. That was the lie. The truth is I wanted him. And when he opened the door looking surprised to see me standing there in the rain, I kissed him before he could even speak. I still hate myself for that. We only slept together once. One reckless, emotional, devastating mistake that somehow felt inevitable from the moment he first touched my hand on that balcony. Afterward, I cried in his bed while he held me silently. Not romantic crying. Grief. Because even while it was happening, I knew it would destroy everything. The next morning, Ethan looked at me and said, "This can't become another lie." I left before sunrise and never spoke about it again. Not to him. Not to Daniel. Not even in therapy. And now I was standing in my bathroom holding a positive pregnancy test while realizing there was a real chance I didn't know who the father was. I slid down against the wall shaking so badly I could barely breathe. Then my phone buzzed. Daniel. Leaving work early. Thought we could get dinner together. I stared at the message with tears already forming in my eyes. Because suddenly dinner felt like the least complicated part of my life. That evening I told him. Not everything. Just the pregnancy. Daniel froze for half a second before pure shock turned into something softer. Hope. Actual hope. "Oh my God," he whispered. I'll never forget his face in that moment. The way his eyes lit up. The way he smiled like maybe this was finally something good after months of emotional destruction. And that's the exact moment guilt became unbearable. Because while he wrapped his arms around me in our kitchen, all I could think was, "There's a chance this baby isn't yours. There's a chance this baby isn't yours." That sentence repeated in my head so loudly over the next few days that I could barely function. Meanwhile, Daniel transformed into someone I hadn't seen in years. He smiled more, touched me more, started talking about the future again. One night, he even laughed while assembling some ridiculously expensive baby crib online, just to compare prices, and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom because I thought I was going to throw up from guilt. Every kind gesture made it worse. Because the more hopeful he became, the more monstrous I felt. I tried convincing myself the baby was probably Daniel's. Statistically, it made more sense. But probably isn't certainty. And uncertainty was slowly poisoning me. Then Ethan texted me from a different number. Daniel told me. My chest tightened immediately. I stared at the screen for nearly a minute before replying. "You shouldn't contact me." 3 dots appeared instantly. Then, "Is it mine?" I physically stopped breathing for a second. No denial. No pretending. Straight to the nightmare both of us were already thinking about. "I don't know." The typing bubble disappeared. Then came back. "We need to talk." I almost ignored him. I should have. Instead, 2 hours later, I was sitting in my car outside a quiet cafe across town waiting for the man I'd nearly destroyed my marriage for. Ethan arrived wearing a black hoodie and exhaustion all over his face. The second he sat down across from me, neither of us knew where to start. Finally, he asked quietly, "Did you tell Daniel about us?" "No." He leaned back slowly and exhaled through his nose. "So he thinks the baby's his. For now." That phrase hit both of us hard. For now. Temporary happiness built on borrowed time. Ethan rubbed his jaw anxiously. "You need a DNA test." "I know. And you need to tell him before that." "I know. But knowing something and surviving it are two different things." The waitress came by, but neither of us ordered anything except coffee we barely touched. At some point, Ethan looked at me carefully and asked, "Do you regret it?" I knew exactly what he meant. That night. Us. Everything. "Yes," I answered immediately. His expression shifted slightly. Then I added quietly, "But not in the way I'm supposed to." That honesty hurt him and relieved him at the same time. I could see both happening in real time. "I hate that I still think about you," I admitted. Ethan looked down at his untouched coffee. I never stopped. The tension between us returned instantly, dangerous as ever. But now it was mixed with fear instead of excitement. A child changes everything. Suddenly, this wasn't emotional chaos anymore. It was consequences. Real ones. "You know what the worst part is?" I whispered. "What?" "For a while I convinced myself you happened because my marriage was broken." I looked at him carefully. "But I think my marriage breaking is what made me notice how much I wanted something real." Ethan's eyes held mine for several long seconds. Then he said something that completely shattered me. "If the baby's mine, I don't want you disappearing from my life." I looked away immediately because part of me wanted that too. And that made me feel unforgivable. When I got home, Daniel was asleep on the couch with his laptop open beside him. Baby name websites filled the screen. I just stood there staring at him. At the man who betrayed me. At the man I betrayed worse. At the man who still believed this child was the beginning of something hopeful instead of the fuse attached to a bomb. Then Daniel stirred awake slightly and smiled sleepily when he saw me. "There's my wife," he murmured. And for the first time in months, I almost told him everything. I almost told him everything. The words were right there. "Daniel, I slept with your brother." "Daniel, there's a chance this baby isn't yours." "Daniel, I don't even fully understand how we became these people." But then he smiled at me again, tired, hopeful, genuine, and I lost my nerve completely. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded too fast. "Just tired." That answer had become a disease in our marriage. Tired. Always tired instead of honest. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel threw himself into the pregnancy completely. He came to every appointment. Read parenting articles at 2 a.m. Started cooking healthier dinners, like suddenly becoming a father transformed him into some emotionally evolved version of himself. And the worst part? It almost worked on me. There were moments I'd look at him and think, maybe we can survive this. Then I'd remember Ethan's hands on my waist in that dark apartment. The way he looked at me afterward like he knew we'd crossed a line neither of us could ever uncross. And the guilt came flooding back. One evening, Daniel asked if we could finally open Ethan's letter together. I froze immediately. "The letter?" I asked carefully. "Yeah." He shrugged. "Maybe it'll give some closure." Closure. If only he knew. I tried to avoid it, but Daniel already stood up and grabbed the envelope from the kitchen drawer before I could stop him. My pulse went insane. "Daniel, it's just a letter." No, it wasn't. Because I never told Daniel what happened the night I went to Ethan's apartment. And deep down, I was terrified Ethan wrote about it. Daniel sat beside me on the couch and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a folded, handwritten note. And a photograph. The second Daniel saw the picture, his entire body stiffened. My stomach dropped. It was an old photo of him and Ethan as kids. Maybe 12 and 9 years old. Standing beside a lake smiling with fishing rods in their hands. Daniel unfolded the letter slowly, then started reading silently. I watched his face change line by line. Confusion. Shock. Pain. Finally, he lowered the paper slightly and whispered, "Oh my God." Every nerve in my body went cold. "What does it say?" Daniel looked up at me like he suddenly didn't recognize his own life anymore. Then he handed me the letter. My hands shook while reading it. "Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I finally left before things got worse. There's something I never told you about the accident. Claire wasn't the first person you cheated with. Mom knew about the others too. That's why she always protected you and treated me like the unstable one whenever we fought. Because keeping you looking perfect mattered more. I spent years hating you for that. Then I met her. And for the first time, I understood why people ruin themselves chasing feelings they shouldn't. That doesn't excuse what happened between us. Nothing does. But you need to stop pretending you're the only victim in this family. And she deserves honesty from both of us now. Ethan." The room felt completely silent after I finished. Daniel looked sick. "You knew?" I asked quietly. "No. But the cheating before Claire was true?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. That hesitation was enough. I stood up so fast the letter fell from my lap. "How many?" Daniel rubbed both hands over his face shakily. It wasn't serious. I actually laughed at that. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. "You destroyed our marriage years before Ethan ever touched me," I whispered. Daniel looked up with red eyes. Then he asked the one question I'd been dreading most. "Did he sleep with you? Did he sleep with you?" Everything inside me stopped. This was the moment. The exact moment every lie finally collided together. Daniel was staring at me with a kind of quiet devastation I'd never seen before. Not anger anymore. Not suspicion. Fear. Real fear. And for the first time since all this started, I realized something horrible. He already knew the answer. Maybe not logically, but emotionally. People always know when love changes shape. I could barely breathe. "Yes," I whispered. Daniel closed his eyes immediately. Like the word physically hurt. The silence afterward felt endless. Finally, he asked, very quietly, "When?" I sat back down slowly because my legs suddenly felt weak. After he moved out. Daniel laughed once under his breath. Broken. Disbelieving. "So, while I was trying to fix us." "I know. You went to him." Tears started forming instantly. "I know." He stood up abruptly and walked toward the kitchen. I heard a glass hit the counter harder than necessary. For a second, I thought he might throw something. Instead, he just stood there gripping the edge of the sink like he was trying not to collapse. "I hate that I understand why," he admitted quietly. That caught me completely off guard. "What?" Daniel stared down at the counter. "I spent years lying to you. Being emotionally absent. Pretending work mattered more than everything else." He swallowed hard. "And Ethan. Ethan sees people too clearly. He always has." Hearing him say that made me cry harder. Because it was true. Ethan noticed loneliness in me long before I admitted it existed. But that didn't make what we did okay. "I never wanted to become this person," I whispered. Daniel finally turned around. His eyes looked exhausted now. "Neither did I." That sentence shattered something in me. Because suddenly this stopped feeling like a simple story about betrayal. It was about two damaged people slowly destroying a marriage by avoiding honesty for years. And now there was a child in the middle of it. Daniel sat back down across from me. Then he asked the question neither of us wanted to say out loud. "Do you think the baby's his?" I wiped my face immediately. "I don't know." The words hung there heavily. "I counted dates 100 times," I admitted shakily. "I keep trying to convince myself it's impossible, but I can't." Daniel nodded slowly like he'd already mentally prepared for that answer. Then came the twist I never expected. "I already suspected," he said quietly. I stared at him. "What?" He looked ashamed suddenly. "After you told me about the pregnancy, I checked your location history." My chest tightened. "And? You drove to Ethan's apartment that night." I felt completely exposed. "You knew this whole time?" I didn't want to believe it. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. That hurt more than yelling ever could have. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel asked something even worse. "Do you love him?" I opened my mouth. Closed it again. Because there wasn't a safe answer anymore. "I don't know what I feel," I whispered. Daniel looked down immediately. That hesitation alone told him enough. Then his phone buzzed on the couch beside him. Ethan. Both of us stared at the screen silently. One message preview appeared. I'm done hiding. She deserves the truth about why Claire was really in the car that night. Daniel's face lost all color. And suddenly I realized there was still one more secret neither brother had told me yet. Daniel grabbed his phone immediately, but I reached it first. What does that mean? I asked sharply. Give me the phone. No. His expression darkened instantly. This isn't the time. That's funny coming from someone who's hidden entire alternate lives from me. The tension in the room turned suffocating again. Finally, Daniel exhaled hard and sat back down slowly. You're not going to like this. I already don't. He rubbed his face with both hands before speaking. The night of the accident. Ethan called Claire. My stomach tightened. What? Daniel stared at the floor. He found out about the affair before I confessed it to anyone. Suddenly pieces started rearranging in my head again. When did he find out? A few days before the crash. And? Daniel swallowed hard. They argued. I blinked. Ethan and Claire? He threatened to tell you. The room felt colder instantly. Daniel continued quietly, like every word physically hurt. Claire panicked. She wanted me to end things completely before everything exploded. And you didn't. No. I looked at him carefully. So what happened that night? Daniel's jaw tightened. We fought in the car. About Ethan? Yes. He finally looked up at me, exhausted and ashamed. She kept saying everything was falling apart because of him. I defended him. She blamed him. Then she grabbed my phone while we were driving because Ethan kept calling. A horrible feeling crept into my chest. And that's when the crash happened. Daniel nodded slowly. For several seconds I couldn't process anything. So Ethan blames himself, I whispered. Daniel laughed bitterly. Of course he does. Suddenly Ethan's behavior over the past months made painful sense. The guilt. The recklessness. The obsession with honesty. The way he looked at Daniel sometimes like he was carrying years of anger and grief at the same time. You let him believe it was his fault? I asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. That silence told me enough. Oh my God. He already hated himself, Daniel said defensively. Nothing I said changed that. That's not an excuse. No, he admitted. It's not. I stood up and started pacing because sitting still suddenly felt impossible. Everything about this family was built on buried guilt. Daniel buried affairs. Ethan buried blame. And I buried feelings until they exploded into something irreversible. Then my phone rang. Ethan. Daniel saw the screen and immediately looked away. Answer it, he said quietly. I hesitated. Then picked up. Hello. For a second all I heard was breathing. Then Ethan spoke softly. Did he tell you? Yes. Silence. Finally Ethan laughed weakly through the phone. I figured. You thought the crash was your fault? I know it was. No, I said immediately. It wasn't. You don't understand. Then explain it. Another long silence. Then Ethan said something that made my blood run cold. Claire was pregnant too. I stopped breathing. What? Daniel looked up sharply from across the room. Even he looked shocked. She told me during the phone call, Ethan continued quietly. Right before the crash. The room spun. Daniel didn't know, Ethan said. She was trying to tell him that night. I looked at my husband instantly. His face had gone completely pale. You didn't know? I whispered. Daniel looked physically sick now. No. The silence afterward felt unbearable. Then Ethan said the one sentence none of us were prepared for. That baby might have been mine. That baby might have been mine. I genuinely thought I misheard him. The apartment went completely silent. Daniel stared at my phone like the words themselves had physically hit him. I could hear Ethan breathing faintly through the speaker, uneven and strained. Finally, I whispered. What are you talking about? Ethan laughed weakly. Not because anything was funny. Because everything was ruined. Claire and I, he stopped. It happened before her and Daniel started officially seeing each other. I looked at Daniel instantly. He looked shattered. You slept with her too? I asked quietly. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. I didn't know. But you knew Ethan dated her first. She told me they were done. Ethan's voice cut through the phone sharply. Because she lied to both of us. The realization spread through me slowly and horribly. This wasn't just one betrayal. This family had been trapped in the same cycle for years, secrets, overlapping relationships, guilt passed between brothers like inheritance. And now history was repeating itself through me. I suddenly felt nauseous. I can't do this right now, I whispered. Wait, Ethan said quickly. There's more. Of course there was. There's always more, Daniel muttered bitterly. Ethan ignored him. The reason I moved in with you wasn't random. I froze. What? Daniel looked up slowly too. Ethan exhaled shakily. Mom asked me to. Confusion hit me immediately. Why? Neither brother answered right away. Then Daniel quietly said, she thought we were falling apart. My stomach twisted. She knew. She notices everything, Daniel said softly. Ethan continued carefully. After therapy started, Daniel told her things were bad between you two. She thought maybe if I stayed nearby, I could help keep things stable. I almost laughed at the absurdity. So your mother accidentally sent the worst possible person into our marriage. No, Ethan whispered painfully. She sent the person who already cared about you before he realized he shouldn't. That sentence hit me harder than I wanted it to. Daniel looked away immediately. I pressed a hand against my forehead, overwhelmed. This is insane. Nobody disagreed. Then Ethan spoke again, quieter now. I tried to leave before anything happened. I know. No, he said. You don't. Something in his tone made me nervous. What do you mean? Silence. Then. I was already in love with you before that balcony night. Every muscle in my body tightened. Across the room, Daniel closed his eyes slowly. You barely knew me, I whispered. I knew enough. The honesty in his voice made my chest ache. And maybe that was the cruelest part of all this. Despite how wrong everything became, none of it felt fake. Messy. Destructive. Unforgivable. But not fake. Daniel finally stood up abruptly. I can't listen to this. He walked toward the bedroom, then stopped halfway down the hall without turning around. Are you going to leave with him if the baby's his? The question hung in the apartment like smoke. Ethan went silent on the phone. Because suddenly all three of us understood something terrifying. That possibility was real now. I opened my mouth carefully. And realized I still didn't know the answer. Daniel nodded bitterly like my silence told him enough. Then he disappeared into the bedroom and shut the door. A few seconds later I heard something heavy hit the wall inside. Not rage. Grief. Ethan spoke softly again through the phone. I never wanted to become this to you. I closed my eyes tightly. You already did. Then another wave of nausea hit me so hard I nearly dropped the phone. I barely made it to the bathroom before getting sick. And while I knelt there shaking on the cold tile floor, I realized my life had somehow become a mirror of Claire's. The similarity hit me so hard it made my stomach turn again. A woman caught between two brothers. A pregnancy surrounded by uncertainty. Secrets multiplying faster than truth. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt actual fear instead of emotional chaos. Fear for the baby. Fear for myself. Fear that every relationship in this family was cursed to repeat the same destruction over and over. I rinsed my face in the sink and stared at my reflection. I barely recognized myself anymore. Behind me, the bathroom door opened slightly. Daniel stood there quietly. His eyes looked red now. I'm sorry, I whispered automatically. He leaned against the doorway and laughed softly to himself. That phrase has lost all meaning between us two. Fair. I looked down at my shaking hands. I never wanted to hurt you like this. I know. That surprised me. Daniel stepped farther into the bathroom slowly. The messed up part is, I genuinely believe you. Tears burned my eyes instantly. Because despite everything, none of this started with cruelty. It started with loneliness, neglect, unspoken resentment, emotional starvation people ignored until it became dangerous. Still unforgivable. But human. Daniel sat on the closed toilet lid and looked exhausted. Do you know what scares me most? What? That if the baby's mine. He swallowed hard. You'll always think about him when you look at our child. That completely broke me. Because part of me feared the opposite too. If the baby was Ethan's, would I always see Daniel in the life we almost saved? There's no version of this that doesn't hurt someone, I whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. Then, after a long silence, he asked something quietly that caught me off guard. When you were with him, did you love him? Not do you. Did, past tense. Like he was already preparing himself emotionally for the answer. I wiped my face slowly. I think I loved how seen I felt with him. Daniel looked down immediately. And with me? I hesitated too long again. With you, I admitted softly, I felt safe. The pain on his face after that sentence was immediate. Because safety without intimacy eventually starts feeling like distance. Daniel nodded once, almost to himself. That's what I was afraid of. Then his phone buzzed from the bedroom. Neither of us moved initially. A second notification came. Then another. Daniel stood up slowly and walked out to check. A few seconds later, I heard him say, "Oh my God." I followed him immediately. Daniel stood frozen beside the bed staring at his phone screen. What happened? He looked at me carefully. It's Ethan. Cold fear spread through me instantly. What about him? Daniel handed me the phone. There were multiple messages. The first one read, "Don't panic." The second, "Mom found out about the pregnancy." And the third made my chest tighten completely. "She thinks the baby is mine." I looked up sharply. How would she know that? Daniel looked pale again. She's always known Ethan was in love with you. The room spun slightly. What? Daniel sat heavily on the edge of the bed. A few weeks before he moved out, she asked me if I was paying enough attention to my wife. I stared at him speechlessly. She noticed the way Ethan looked at you before either of us admitted anything. That somehow felt even worse. Then another message appeared from Ethan. She's coming to your apartment. Right after that. And she's bringing something from Claire. And she's bringing something from Claire. My entire body went cold. Daniel stood up immediately. What does that mean? I don't know. But deep down, I already knew whatever was coming would make this situation even worse. Somehow, every secret in this family seemed connected by invisible threads that kept tightening around all of us. 20 minutes later, Daniel's mother arrived. Her name was Marianne, and until recently I'd always thought of her as calm, elegant, almost emotionally untouchable. The kind of woman who kept family dinners polite even when tension filled the room. Tonight, she looked exhausted. Older. She stepped into the apartment carrying a small dark box under one arm. The second she saw me, her expression softened in a way that nearly made me cry. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. That immediately terrified me. Because people only look at you like that when something terrible is about to happen. Daniel closed the door behind her carefully. Mom, what's going on? Marianne looked between both of us silently before placing the box onto the kitchen table. I need you two to listen without interrupting, she said quietly. Neither of us spoke. She exhaled slowly. Claire gave me this a week before the accident. My stomach tightened instantly. What is it? I asked. Marianne rested her hand lightly on the box. Letters. Daniel looked confused. Letters to who? She never specified. Something about that answer made the room feel smaller. Marianne opened the box carefully. Inside were dozens of envelopes tied together with faded ribbon. Some had Daniel's name. Some had Ethan's. And one had no name at all. Daniel looked physically uncomfortable now. Why would she give these to you? Marianne hesitated. Then quietly said, because she was afraid one of them would destroy the family. The silence afterward felt suffocating. I looked at the letters again, suddenly understanding that Claire wasn't just hiding an affair. She'd been trapped in the same emotional disaster all of us were drowning in now. Marianne picked up the unnamed envelope first. She told me not to open this unless something terrible happened. Daniel laughed bitterly. I think we passed terrible months ago. No one smiled. Marianne carefully unfolded the letter inside. Then her face changed immediately. Fear. Actual fear. Mom? Daniel asked nervously. She looked up slowly. This letter says Claire was pregnant twice. The room froze. Daniel went pale instantly. What? Marianne swallowed hard. The first pregnancy happened before the accident. Ethan's. The realization hit all of us at the same time without anyone saying it out loud. But then Marianne continued. The second pregnancy ended a year earlier. I frowned immediately. That doesn't make sense. Marianne looked at Daniel. And suddenly I understood. The color drained from my face. You got her pregnant before the accident too? Daniel looked horrified now. I didn't know. Marianne's eyes filled with tears. She lost the baby after an argument with Ethan. The room tilted slightly around me. Everything about these brothers' lives seemed tied to Claire in ways neither of them fully understood. Daniel sat down hard at the kitchen table like his legs stopped working. This is insane, he whispered. Marianne nodded slowly. Claire loved both of you. No one breathed. Then she looked directly at me. And now history is repeating itself. That sentence hit harder than anything else tonight. Because she was right. I suddenly understood why Marianne looked so devastated. She wasn't just watching a marriage collapse. She was watching the same emotional tragedy happen to her sons twice. Then Marianne reached into the box again and pulled out another envelope. This one had Ethan's name written on it. And before anyone could stop her, she handed it to me. You should read this one, she said quietly. You should read this one, she said quietly. My hands shook immediately. Why me? Marianne looked exhausted. Because Ethan never could. Daniel stared at the envelope silently, but didn't try to stop me. The paper looked old, worn slightly at the corners like it had been carried around too many times. I opened it carefully. Inside was a folded letter written in Claire's handwriting. I started reading aloud before realizing halfway through that maybe I shouldn't have. But by then it was too late. Ethan. You keep asking me to choose one of you like it's that simple. Daniel makes me feel safe. You make me feel alive. And maybe that makes me selfish, but I don't know how to separate comfort from passion anymore. You think Daniel doesn't notice how deeply people feel things. He does. He just survives by pretending emotions are smaller than they really are. You're the opposite. You feel everything so intensely that eventually it burns through everyone around you, including yourself. I think that's why I loved you both differently. And I think that's why this family destroys itself in cycles. If anything ever happens to me, promise me you won't spend your life trying to punish yourself for being capable of loving too much. That isn't the worst thing a person can be. Claire. The room stayed silent after I finished. Daniel looked numb. Marianne quietly wiped at her eyes. But all I could think about was Ethan. How many years had he carried guilt and confusion over someone who loved him but never fully chose him? And now somehow I'd become another version of that same story. I need air, I whispered. Nobody stopped me. I stepped out onto the balcony, the same balcony where this entire disaster truly began months ago. Cold night wind hit my face immediately. For a few seconds, I just stood there breathing. Then the balcony door slid open behind me. Daniel. Of course. He stepped beside me quietly, both of us staring out over the city lights. You know what's terrifying? He asked softly. What? I finally understand Ethan now. That hurt more than I expected. Daniel leaned his elbows against the railing. For years I thought he was reckless because he liked chaos. He laughed weakly. But I think he was just desperate to feel loved in a way that felt complete. I looked down. And you? He looked at me carefully. I think I spent my whole life mistaking stability for emotional honesty. That sentence landed heavily between us. Because it described our marriage perfectly. Safe. Functional. Half asleep. After a long silence, Daniel finally asked the question hanging over everything now. If the baby's his, what happens? My throat tightened immediately. I don't know. He nodded slowly. And then, very quietly, would you choose him? I turned toward him fully. This man had hurt me deeply. I'd hurt him worse. And somehow despite all of it, I still cared about him enough that seeing fear in his eyes made my chest ache. I don't think this is about choosing anymore, I admitted softly. Then what is it about? I looked down at my stomach instinctively, trying to stop this cycle before another child grows up inside it. Daniel looked away immediately after that. Because suddenly this stopped being about romance entirely. Now it was about whether any of us were emotionally healthy enough to build a family from the wreckage of secrets and betrayal. Then my phone buzzed. Ethan. One message. I'm outside. My pulse instantly sped up. Daniel saw my expression immediately. You still react to him, he said quietly. I hated that he was right. Another message appeared. There's something Claire told me before she died that none of you know. There's something Claire told me before she died that none of you know. I stared at the message while my heartbeat pounded so hard it hurt. Daniel saw the screen over my shoulder. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, Go talk to him. That surprised me. What? Daniel leaned against the balcony railing with exhausted eyes. At this point, every secret comes out eventually anyway. There was no anger left in his voice anymore. Only fatigue. The kind that comes after months of emotional destruction. I went downstairs alone. Ethan stood outside the apartment building near his car with his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. The second he saw me, his entire expression changed slightly, relief mixed with guilt. You look tired, he said softly. I almost laughed. That's the understatement of the century. For a moment, neither of us moved closer. The tension between us had changed now. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was history. Consequences. A possible child tying us together forever. Finally, I asked, What did Claire tell you? Ethan looked away briefly before answering. The night before the accident, she asked me if I thought people could inherit emotional damage from their parents. I frowned slightly. What? She said your family teaches you how to love before you even realize it's happening. He swallowed hard. And ours taught us that love always involves guilt. Cold air moved between us while I processed that. Because deep down, I knew she was right. Daniel buried feelings until they became lies. Ethan chased intensity until it became destruction. And somehow I got pulled directly between both extremes. She told me something else too, Ethan continued quietly. What? His eyes met mine carefully. She said if she ever had a child, she didn't want them growing up around secrets the way we did. My chest tightened immediately. The baby. Everything suddenly circled back to the baby again. Ethan stepped closer slowly. That's why I came tonight. I looked at him nervously. Why? Because I need to know something before this goes any further. Every nerve in my body went tense. Ethan looked terrified now in a way I'd never seen before. Not scared for himself. Scared emotionally. If the baby's mine, he paused. Would you actually want a life with me? There it was. The question we'd both been avoiding underneath all the chaos. Not lust. Not guilt. A future. And somehow that was scarier than everything else. I looked at him for a long time before answering honestly. I don't know who we are outside of secrets and intensity. That visibly hurt him. But it was true. Most of what existed between us had grown in hidden places, late nights, emotional vulnerability, forbidden tension, broken marriages. None of it existed in normal daylight. Could something born that way survive real life? I didn't know. Ethan nodded slowly like he understood. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and handed me something small. A folded ultrasound photo. I froze. What is this? Claire's. I looked down at the faded image carefully. On the back, in Claire's handwriting, were 4 words. Break the cycle somehow. Tears hit me instantly. Not because of Claire. Not even because of Ethan. Because for the first time, I realized this story was never really about cheating. It was about emotionally damaged people searching for connection in the worst possible places. And now there was a child coming into the middle of all of it. When I finally went back upstairs, Daniel was still sitting on the balcony alone. He looked up when he saw me. Neither of us spoke immediately. Then he looked down at my stomach quietly and asked, What kind of parents are we going to become after all this? I sat beside him slowly. And for the first time in months, I answered with complete honesty. I guess that depends on whether we finally stop lying.